Welcome to r/Maliciouscompliance, where your wish is my command. It's 1993, and it's my first day of work as a secretary for a high-powered attorney in my hometown. He brags that when people give him a 2-week notice, he immediately takes their office key, has them clean out their desk, and hands them a final paycheck. After 8 months of working for him, I call in needing extra rest one morning. I was at a job interview. Then go in at 1 p.m. and tell him I quit. He asked me to finish out the day's work, which I do. At the end of the day, he comes to my desk and asks me to at least finish out the week, stating I put them in a hard spot for not giving a 2-week notice. I remind him that on my first day of employment, he told me he didn't accept 2-week notices, and that's why I didn't give him a 2-week notice. I received my final paycheck and walked out with a smile on my face. Our next Reddit post is from Lipwiggler. Last year, my wife and I got married. My parents and sister live halfway across the world, but that didn't stop them from coming over to celebrate. Since neither my wife or I get to spend much time with them, we decided to rent a house for a couple of days in a nearby wine region. You know, hang out, drink some wine, eat some cheese, and have some quality family time. It had been 3 years since we last saw them. A month or so before my parents and sisters came over, I got an email from the owners of the vacation house saying that they had sold the property, but the new owners were going to continue to rent out the house and they were going to honor the booking, so not to worry. All good. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the new owners saying the booking was still okay, but they were going over their records and said I still owed them $100 for the booking. I replied back with the receipt and booking confirmation that I was all paid up. Turns out, the new owners unilaterally decided to increase the price of the accommodation, and I had to pay up. But they were gracious enough to say that I could cancel at no cost, but they'd rather we'd keep the booking and pay the little extra. No cost for canceling the booking, you say. Within 5 minutes, I'd found another vacation house in the same region. There's literally dozens of them. I sent a quick email back to please cancel my booking and process the refund. We'd like you to keep the booking. Can we split the difference? No thanks, please cancel the booking. If you keep the booking, we'll throw in a bottle of wine. No thanks, please cancel the booking. Good thing the refund came back within days. Their reviews have been less than stellar on TripAdvisor. I wonder why. Then we have a contribution from Here is Kyle down in the comments. I had a similar experience. My wife and I booked an Airbnb, and a month after booking, 1 week before the trip, the owner said they'd increased rates and wanted us to pay more. I said no, so they asked me to cancel. I once again said no. Airbnb charges a penalty of $50 to B&B owners for canceling on guests, and if they do it enough times, Airbnb will delist them. I also think that if they cancel on a guest, they can't rent to another person during the same time frame. They were trying to get me to cancel to avoid any negative repercussions. They then offered me $40 to cancel the booking. I replied I would cancel the booking for $100. They said I was being unfair, so I explained that they were in fact the ones being unfair and that I knew they were trying to circumvent Airbnb rules. They canceled within minutes of my reply. Our next Reddit post is from Serious Lampshade. Once upon a time, I was a newlywed, getting ready for my first Christmas with my in-laws. Now, it's worth noting that these people are Christmas crazy. You know that one house on the block that's decked out in more bling than a cashed-up stripper? That's them. So, as a new bride, I wanted to make a good impression. I should also note that my new husband had a history of taking credit for things he'd played no part in, such as presents or meals, or a wedding. In the lead up to Christmas, I had shopped, wrapped, and ribboned as if my life depended on it. Everyone had carefully selected gifts that were wrapped immaculately with a complimenting ribbon and bow and handmade tags, not the stickers with to and from. Christmas morning, I was ready. We entered the living room, and after the momentary visual adjustment required for that amount of tinsel in a confined space, everyone sat around the tree for the gift-giving ceremony. The ceremony was a big part of the day for my in-laws. One person was selected to wear a Santa hat and distribute the gifts one by one. When it was your turn to open a gift, everybody watched you. What I didn't know then is this was a form of analysis so it could be discussed later. A few gifts were given out, then one of the ones I'd wrapped was handed to my husband. I was terribly excited. It was something he'd wanted for ages. I couldn't wait for him to be thrilled when he opened it. But wait, I did, because he couldn't get the ribbon off. We weren't supposed to talk during the ceremony, so we all sat there quietly while a grown man wrestled with a ribbon. It was a curling ribbon for those in the know, not exactly a Rubik's Cube. After a good 10 minutes of watching him lose his mind, I quietly suggested he pull the bow off so the ribbon would slip off the side. He did so, and was mildly enthused at the gift. We moved on to the next person, and after a bit, my husband was handed another gift. My mother-in-law said, "Don't worry, I won't tell you how to open it," with a completely innocent smile on her face. I chose not to say what I was thinking. Shortly after, a gift was handed to me from my parents-in-law with an insincere apology that it didn't have a bow. At this point, I figured I must have somehow broken ceremony etiquette by using ribbon. I made a mental note not to repeat my mistake in the future and laughed it off. First Christmas, right? There's bound to be some hiccups. Following the ceremony, it was lunchtime, which went fine. Afterwards, the men retired downstairs while the women cleaned up. This wasn't unusual as they're a fairly traditional family. Except, instead of helping my mother and sister-in-law with the dishes, I was sent to collect the scraps of wrapping paper from earlier and take them out to the rubbish. This was a little unusual. When I'd been there for meals before, I'd done dishes with them. But again, it's Christmas and they have their rules. So I collected it all up and then went back to the kitchen to get another rubbish bag. I was in the hallway and I overheard their conversation about how utterly terrible I was at domestic things. How I'd clearly paid to have the gifts wrapped to show off, how the things I'd picked were unsuitable, and I was so ungrateful for what they'd given me, etc., etc. I was steamed. Unexpectedly, my husband chimed in. "If I'd known she was going to be stupid with it, I would have helped. But I was so busy working and she swore she'd take care of it." I went from steamed to apocalyptic. He was in his 3rd week of an 8-week holiday from work while I was working extra shifts trying to get a promotion. I had begged him to help me choose things for his family. When we got home later and I'd calmed down a bit, I tried talking to him about it. His response was a groveling apology and an explanation that his family were a bit crazy about Christmas and that I should just leave family gifts to him. So the following Christmas, I bought a gift for each of them. One gift. From me only, wrapped with simple paper and minimal tape. Christmas morning comes around, and my husband is given the honor of the Santa hat. Halfway through, he starts looking around the tree frantically, obviously having realized that there was nothing from him under there. Afterwards, he pulls me aside and asks me what the flip. I'm sure I looked way more innocent than I felt when I answered, "I left the family gifts to you." I don't have a funny story about the 3rd Christmas because our marriage didn't last that long. But I've just finished wrapping a pile of gifts for this Christmas. And as I curled the ribbon to make my kids' presents extra fancy, I felt very vindicated to know that tomorrow morning's chaos will have 0 sense of ceremony about it. Merry Christmas. So that's a great story, but I thought it was going in a different direction, and Liz Lowly down in the comments agrees. I seriously thought that you were going to sit there and struggle to unwrap your gift for 45 minutes straight and then shush harass them if they offer advice. But yeah, the divorce seems like a better call. Our next Reddit post is from Draken99. As a freelance designer, getting content from clients was almost always the hardest bit. One client asked me to design them a flyer for an event they were running. Fine, no problem. After a few weeks, with the deadline getting closer, I still hadn't had any info from them. So I put together a design using dummy copy for the date, time, and event details and sent it over with the hope they'd just fill in the blanks and send it back. They didn't. The afternoon before the mailing was supposed to go out, I got an angry call from them asking why it hadn't gone to print. I explained it couldn't go to print because they hadn't actually given me any information. "Oh no, we won't decide all that until the board meeting next week. But the flyer has to go out tomorrow." "Are you sure? There's no information on it." "Yes, print it. It's fine as it is." "Okay, if you're really sure." "Yes." The next day, I got a very angry phone call from the client's boss asking why the flyer sent to thousands of people was full of lorem ipsum. Well, what a bunch of morons. Who schedules a meeting to figure out what's supposed to go on a flyer after they send out the flyer? Our next Reddit post is from Boat Des Toads. This is a story from my mom that I heard quite often growing up. Some background. Her parents were very religious and particularly her mom, very conservative. Her mom was a missionary at one point. Her dad was a minister. So they weren't particularly thrilled with the boyfriend she met in college. My dad, who was a long-haired, pot-smoking hippie, was 9 years older than her and had run afoul of the law on numerous occasions. He was literally camping out in the Duke University forest while she was attending the university as a political science student. Plus, he was white, she's black, and it was the late 70s/early 80s when interracial relationships were much less common and more frowned upon. She finally quit her studies to follow him hitchhiking all over the country after he skipped bail and fled the state to avoid getting charged with his third drug-related misdemeanor, which would have been upgraded to a felony since North Carolina was a 3-strike state. So my grandparents, especially my grandma, already disliked him. When my mom brought him home to her parents after the whole dropping out of a prestigious university and becoming a hippie thing, and they slept in the same room, her parents were unhappy to say the least. My granddad was doing his absolute best to be accepting, but my grandmother's interpretation of Christian teachings leaned much more heavily on traditional social mores than on the tolerance my granddad tried to practice. My grandma confronted my mom and proclaimed that she and my dad were not going to live in sin under her roof, and they couldn't sleep in the same room in my grandparents' house until they were married. My mom seemed to accept this. She and my dad went back to Texas where they'd been living for a bit. They filed for common law marriage. Pretty easy to do in Texas, or at least it was then. When they came back to visit again and my grandma repeated her ultimatum, my mom smugly informed her that they were married. Definitely not what my grandmother had in mind. To be honest, I don't think the Christian thing had anything to do with your grandmother being kind of wary of your dad. Because I'll be honest, your dad is kind of giving out some red flags there. Our next Reddit post is from Berthole. This happened in a pub a while back. After drinking most of the night, it was time to start hitting home. First, I needed to shed some extra weight, so I went to a toilet and sat down in the second booth, as the first one had a sign about missing a toilet paper dispenser. After sitting down for a while, I hear someone entering the Paperless booth, while at least 2 others were vacant on my other side. I knock on the dividing wall and politely tell the guy that there's no paper in that booth. I get a snappy response of, "Shut it and mind your own goddamn business." Nice. Real nice. Anyways, I hear him starting to work with his relief, and it indeed sounded quite messy. I finish my pooperoo, and when I was washing my hands, I hear knocking from the first booth, and Mr. Polite saying, "Hey dude, pass me that toilet roll, yo. Come on, man, I really need some paper here, yo." After considering my options for a moment, I replied, "Shut it and mind your own goddamn business," quoting his exact words and tone, and I left him there. He can sit there waiting to get hemorrhoids for what I care, while contemplating how basic manners works in a society. Summon Ninja down in the comments has the perfect malicious compliance reply. He didn't specify used or unused toilet paper? Next time, you know what you have to do. Our next Reddit post is from area Lani Free Spirit. This happened to my dad a long time ago, but he loves to tell us a story. My dad was literally working the last day of his enlistment in the Navy. He worked in communications, but his supervisor decided to get some manual labor out of him on his last day by making my dad put down new tile in one of the mess halls. Since it was a direct order, he had to comply and do the job. He carefully laid down perfectly spaced tiles in the entire room. It took him the rest of the day, but he made sure that it was as perfectly lined up as humanly possible. Supervisor looks in the room, approves the job, closes the door, and tells him he can go home. What he didn't realize is that my dad used absolutely no glue of any kind. I don't know what happened the next day when someone actually discovered what he did, but I'm sure it didn't go well for the supervisor. He never heard anything about it, but was planning to play dumb and say he didn't know it needed glue. After all, it was a job he was never trained for. Then, we have another contribution from Computent down in the comments. When I was in the Navy, we found out about a flooring that wouldn't need to be waxed and buffed. It cost $50,000 to put in a test floor in one of the officer mess spaces. It didn't last a day before a Master Chief asked one of the FSAs if it had been waxed lately, and when he heard no, said FSA was told to wax it. The CS1 knew about the special flooring and tried to explain it, but a first class doesn't explain anything to a Master Chief who has been in the Navy longer than the lubber has been alive. Once you wax the flooring, it destroys the special coating that keeps it shiny without the wax. $50,000 down the drain. Sigh. That was rSlash and if you want to maliciously comply, be sure to hit that like button because it really helps my channel grow.